critical for tomorrow's economic growth, and you cannot deal with the deficit in 1 year. This is a multi-year program, and therefore we need to be very careful where we're spending our money so that we create the jobs for tomorrow and we create the opportunity for America to make it, to make things in America once again. Mr. Tonko, if you would continue on.
I'll make this one point. I mean, obviously, it's about investments, not spending, investments. Expecting lucrative dividends, lucrative returns. And who is this cutting frenzy an attack on? It's an attack on middle-class America. It's an attack on children. It's an attack on working families. It's an attack on our seniors. And we only get here what we're wanting to invest here. And I think that we can go forward with a soundness of policy and a resourcefulness of investments made that allow us to carry us, transition us into a new economy designed intentionally to grow the potential of this nation. That's what America wants from us. And I think this attack is a tremendously cold-hearted attack on America's working families. It's going to destroy our middle class. Without a strong middle class, there is not a strong America. Someone needs to create the products, build the products, someone needs to purchase the products. And without a strong middle class, without strong purchasing power for that middle class, the story's over. So let's move on. Let's march forward with Make It in America. It is great to join you, Representative Garamendi, for this special order.
Well, Mr. Tonko, if I could just pick up on one of the issues you raised, which are the ways in which we spend our money. Now, we all pay a gasoline tax. Right now, it seems as though we're being taxed by the oil companies an extra 50 cents or $1 because the price of gasoline is way up there. But actually, the federal tax on gasoline is about 18.5 cents, and on diesel some 25 cents. That money is used to build our infrastructure, our streets, our roads, the interstate highway system, as well as trains, buses, and the like. The question is, where do we spend that money? Now, previously, we would spend that money on buses that were made overseas. We would spend that money on trains and light rail cars that were made overseas. But our agenda here is to bring it home to America. If it's our tax money, we want that money to be spent on things that are made in America. Let me give you a couple of examples on transportation. Buses. Are they made in America? Our tax money, is it being used to purchase buses that are made in America? It can be. I have a bill that I've introduced that says if it's our tax money, it's going to be spent on American-made equipment. Happens to be the exact same policy that China is following, and it's a good policy. You've talked about solar, and you've talked about wind, the energy future of tomorrow. People and economists that look at the energy issue say that if we go to renewable energy, clean energy sources, we can have an enormous new economy in America. But if we fail to take up the challenge, that economy will be overseas. How can we jumpstart the American economy in the new energy sector? We can do it by using our tax money to support American-made solar systems, whether they are panels like this or the new solar thermal programs, the wind systems. It's our tax money that are allowing these systems to be built, but are those American-made? My legislation would say, yes, they must be American-made. And I'll give you one example of where this has worked. We are now, and this is the President's agenda on high-speed rail. Happens to be mine. I introduced a piece of legislation in California in 1989 that established the High-Speed Rail Commission. We need to do that. And in the legislation, and this was the Recovery Act, the stimulus, it said money for high-speed rail must be spent on American-made equipment. So Siemens, Alstom, other companies are establishing manufacturing facilities in America. We can do it with wise public policy. And I know that you've talked about this and you've introduced some legislation of your own, so if you would share with us your views on how this is working.
Well, I think that it's important for us to make certain that we create the renewable industry here in this country. And you know, you talked about the challenges of competing with China. Well, let's look at the proof in the pudding. Let's take a look at what it looked like in '08. Private sector investment in the United States was at some $32 billion. And China was at about 23 billion in terms of private sector investment in renewables. Then fast forward to the next year in '09, and it flipped. China was at 35 billion, we're down to 19 billion. We need to make certain we can compete, and we compete effectively by investing. It's there. The clarion wake-up calls are sounding, and we need to heed them. We need to listen to those alarms that are going off telling us that without investing into the future, we are going to lose in the race. So I want to put a hopeful spin on this. I think that our efforts as Democrats in this House to make it in America are right on. It's what the doctor ordered. We're talking about investing in a clean energy, innovation economy. We're talking about investing in higher ed, in R&D. That's how we win it. We win it by a complete commitment to an agenda that is well documented through the years. It's no different now. If we want to win this global race on innovation, we need to march forward aggressively with the resources and with passionate resolve, and we can win it. I believe in my heart we can win it. We just need to commit to the American public that are counting on us to provide the hope at their doorstep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tonko. You are a tremendous representative of New York State and America. Your passion for the Build It in America, Make It in America agenda is so very obvious. We thank you for that. I want to wrap this session up with going back to what we dealt with on the floor earlier today. Earlier today, we dealt with a continuing resolution that would go for 3 weeks, and it has a series of cuts in it. Some of those cuts are appropriate. Some of them are very, very detrimental. For example, about $120 million of reduction in the National Ocean and Atmospheric Budget. That's where we get information on tsunamis. That's where we get information on hurricanes. Why we would cut that out, I have no idea. It is going to be very, very detrimental to America. And on research, we've talked about that not only in this bill, agricultural research, so that we can move forward once more with a new green revolution so that there'll be food for the people of this world and for ourselves. That was cut out of this budget. And if you love to have germs and other problems with your food, well, you'll love what the Republicans did earlier this morning or this afternoon when they cut some $24 million out of the animal plant inspection services. Why we want to have contaminated food, I don't know, but apparently our Republican colleagues do know. So anyway, that's been done. But if you take the whole thing in context, I want to point out here that in December, with the continuing resolution in December, that was a Democratic-sponsored resolution to continue funding the government for about 3 months, we cut $41 billion out of the budget. $41 billion out of the budget. Now, when the Republicans came in, they decided to do a new resolution a couple of weeks ago, and that resolution would actually eliminate some 700,000 jobs in America. Is it going to lead to a solution of the deficit? Not really, because we're talking about the discretionary spending, which is a very, very small part of the American budget. As such, there's no way you can really solve the deficit problem in that way. Yes, we need to make reductions. That's why we did $41 billion back in December. But those were very targeted cuts that continue to allow America to invest in those things that create jobs. We're now into a new set of continuing resolutions, 2 weeks last week or 2 weeks ago, another 3 weeks this week. That's no way to run a government, but that's apparently what we have been reduced to. Now, I understand the argument that we didn't get an appropriation bill last fall. Why wasn't there an appropriation bill last fall? The reason is that it was blocked in the Senate by a handful of folks that threatened a filibuster. That's why we don't have a resolution. That's why we've been thrown into this continuing resolution problem. What we need to do is to take the long term. In President Obama's budget, the long-term deficit is dealt with over a period of 5 years, bringing down the deficit to a point where it is an acceptable part of the American economy. Allows the economy to grow with investments that are made now in infrastructure, education, investments made in research and development so that we can grow the economy for tomorrow. That's a wise way to do it. But a feeding frenzy of cuts that actually would eliminate 700,000 jobs is not the way you grow the American economy. We have to be wise. We have to have the long term. And we have had the long term before. During the Clinton administration, we actually balanced the budget for the last 2.5 years of that administration, and we were able to create, had those policies gone forward during the Bush administration, had those policies been kept in place, we would have eliminated the American debt. Would have been gone. But those policies were radically changed by the George W. Bush administration. 2 tax cuts, not paid for, most of those benefits going to the high end of the economy, to the very, very wealthy, resulting in a significant increase in the deficit, and then an increase in the Medicare program for drug benefits, again, not paid for, increasing the deficit, and 2 wars, neither of which were paid for, the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war, not paid for, but rather borrowed money from China and other places. The result of that, an enormous increase in the deficit, followed by the Great Recession, which was basically caused by greed, Wall Street greed, and the elimination of regulation. It was as though you had an NFL football game and you'd wiped out the sidelines, you took the referees off the field, send them back to the locker room. Okay, play ball, boys. You know what would happen. Chaos. And that's what we got in the financial sector when regulation was removed, and we wound up with the Great Recession. We need to put in place sound regulation, good regulation, and we need to have the referees on the field. We also need to have a long-term vision on how to deal with the deficit. And you cannot do it by just, in a feeding frenzy, wiping out critical programs that create future economic growth. Unfortunately, that's what our Republican colleagues have suggested we do. We're not there yet. The H.R. 1, the resolution that would have lost 700,000 jobs, was stopped in the Senate. We're now into a process of short-term continuing resolutions to keep the government going. Be wise as you put forward those resolutions, I would ask my colleagues on the Republican side. It's a great challenge. It's a challenge that we must and we will meet. We need a balanced, long-term vision, bringing the economy along, allowing it to grow and to build in the future, whether that be the green tech economy of the future, the medical systems, the healthcare systems. We have great opportunity, but those opportunities will not be met if we're not wise and if we have the wrong kind of deficit reduction plans, which, again, we saw today on this floor not more than an hour ago. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, and I thank my colleagues.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Schmidt, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about a subject I really love, and that's history, especially women's history. I think all too often, as we grew up as children, our history books failed to mention the courageous activities of women throughout the nation and throughout the world. Somehow we learned about men, but all too often not about women. But when we did learn about women, we didn't learn what they really were all about. You know, growing up as a little girl, I grew up in an era where women were not really allowed to do all the things that we can do today. We weren't allowed to run marathons or drive race cars or be at the pits at the Indianapolis 500 as a press person. We weren't allowed in rotaries. It was just not something women were allowed to do. Why, shoot, women weren't even allowed to vote until 1920. In fact, the first woman that served in this House served there 2 full years before women had the right to vote. And when you think about all the things that have happened in this last century, we have to look to a century before to see, wow, who are the folks that really made this happen? Because it just didn't happen overnight. In the hallway out in the rotunda, there is what I think is the best statue. And it's the statue of the pioneers for women's suffrage. It's an extraordinary piece of artwork, one that depicts the likenesses of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Susan B. Anthony, arguably the women who pushed the button for women today to have true equal rights with men. These were the most pro-women feminists in the history of America. And as you will see in a few moments, the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, for Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were just not written when I was a little girl. I'd like to begin this hour by referring to a few quotes from a couple of these foremothers that truly show where they stood in history with what I believe is the most pro-feminine issue, and that's the issue of abortion. You see, Mr. Speaker, every one of us has the right to life, born and unborn. And it is the women who have the responsibility to make sure that that baby is born. Unfortunately, our courts, over 33 years ago, decided to change that and said that women had the right to end that life. But, Mr. Speaker, we don't have that right. It is our responsibility to bear those children. And these foremothers knew that. In a letter to Julia Ward Howard in 1873, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the woman who shocked society, Mr. Speaker, by daring to leave her house proudly showing her pregnancy, because that was just not done, wrote, and I quote, "When we consider that women are treated as property, it is degrading to women to treat our children as property to be disposed of as we see fit." Now, when I was a child in school learning about the issues of women's suffrage and women's rights, I knew Elizabeth Cady Stanton was pro-woman, pro-freedom pioneer, but I didn't know she was pro-life. Shoot, I didn't know she was pro-life till a few years ago. She was hardly alone in her pro-life views. As you can see, Susan B. Anthony also expressed her thoughts about pro-life in the publication, The Revolution. Guilty? Yes. No matter what the motive, love of ease, or desire to save from suffering the unborn innocent, the woman is awfully guilty who commits the deed. It will burden her conscience in life. It will burden her soul in death. Mr. Speaker, those words were written over 100 years ago, over 150 years ago, and yet they could easily be written today. Because today, Mr. Speaker, we hear from women who've had the painful tragedy of abortion on their soul, and they talk about how their heart weeps because of the life that they gave up, and how they want not just to forgive themselves, but to protect women from that awful decision that they made to protect other women from the suffering that they have. And yet, Susan B. Anthony knew that years ago. So you see, in history, pro-life was an issue. And you know, you have to think about it, Mr. Speaker, and you have to think it makes sense, because the whole issue of abortion, it just didn't come about in the 20th century or the 21st century. It came about centuries ago. Unfortunately, indiscretions have happened throughout history. And when indiscretions happen, babies are created. And then the issue becomes, what do you do to hide the dirty little secret? Are you like Hester Prynne in Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, where you put her in prison and then put her out into the wilderness trying to hide Pearl, her beautiful daughter? In the end, only knowing that Pearl became the most beautiful little girl. What was Nathaniel Hawthorne saying about the pregnancy? What was he saying about the birth of that child? Was he saying that child had the right to life? Or was Nathaniel Hawthorne thinking other things? We don't know, but we can only wonder why he put her in prison and why he chastised her to the wilderness. But the point was they wanted to hide the secret, and because she chose to have the child, that secret was going to be born. And so for people like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the 1860s to say, wait a minute, women should have the right to get married, to get divorced, to raise their children, and oh, by the way, have their children, own property, be able to vote. We shouldn't be surprised that protecting the child and the birth of that child was part of their platform. And today, in 2011, I am very proud to stand here and carry on with their message, because today, ever more so, the assault of life is all around us. And I believe that assault of life is there because we don't recognize the meaning of life at its conception. And when you compromise it at its conception, I think you question the validity of life all the way through to its end. You know, each year, and I'm so proud to represent the 2nd Congressional District of Ohio, each year I am really proud of the hundreds of thousands of people that come out to the lawn on the Capitol in probably the coldest day in January to petition Congress to end abortion. It's called the Right to Life March. And in the 5 years that I've been in Congress, standing with them, we've yet to have a decent day. I mean, sometimes it's just cold. Sometimes it's cold and snowy. Sometimes it's cold and rainy. But it's always cold. And I stand out on a platform, and I'm there for maybe an hour, but they're standing there for hours. Kids from schools are coming up in buses, traveling all night, getting off the bus only to stand on cold ground, only to get back on that bus and go right back home and go right back to school. Parents are coming with small kids, buses, cars, airplanes, caravans, asking Congress to end something that is so wrong. And as I look out on the lawn and I see these brave people, I say to myself, wow, that's what America's all about. And among the crowd, I see so many women. I believe more women than men, because women, we have the privilege to experience childbirth, and we understand firsthand what that life is like inside a womb. And I think when we do have that experience and we understand the meaning of life, it makes us want to get out and protect it so that it can have its natural right to come into the world and be the person God wants it to be. And I do this because I'm so proud of the folks that are out there. But I also do it for some folks back home. Back when I was in high school, the whole issue of abortion began to emerge before Roe v. Wade, because states were considering whether they should legalize abortion or not. And there was a couple in Cincinnati by the name of Dr. Jack and Barbara Wilkie, he a physician, she a nurse, who were at the forefront of this movement. And they gathered people like my parents and other people around their coffee table to discuss how we could protect Ohio from legalizing abortion. And then, of course, Roe v. Wade hit in 1973, and the campaign escalated to a national debate. But along the way, and they weren't the only ones, by the way, Mr. Speaker, there were people all across coffee tables, all across America, debating how we're going to protect life. But it was Barbara among the group, and, you know, they were talking on the telephone. It was before email and Blackberries and even fax machines. They were talking on the phone long distance with one another. But it was Barbara at her kitchen table to Jack that said one day, you know, Jack, I just don't understand this whole debate. My gosh, we're protected. Our nation protects us. It says everybody has the right to life. And he says, Barbara, that's the name of the movement. And the name of the movement was branded the National Right to Life movement. Now, Barbara and Jack Wilkie have served for many years in many capacities in this movement. Jack served as president of the National Right to Life Committee for well over a decade. They have founded the International Right to Life Federation and wrote the Handbook on Abortion, a book often described as the unofficial Bible of the pro-life movement during the 70s and 80s. They also have other groups that they work with around the world fighting all kinds of life issues, not just for the unborn, but for human trafficking and women's rights. I mention this because this couple, this simple couple from College Hill, Ohio, is just one of many across our nation that recognizes the importance of this issue and is dedicating their life to eradicating abortion. And so when I stand out on that lawn on those cold January days, each and every year, I look at people and I think there are other Jack and Barbara Wilkies, maybe not as famous, that are doing the same thing, hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And then I think of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the contemporary bearers of that message like the Wilkies. And I say, wow, there is a plan out there, and the last note on abortion hasn't been written. You know, Alice Paul is another pretty important feminist in history. She was actually the original author of the Equal Rights Amendment. And, Mr. Speaker, if you think that abortion is a hot issue, I can remember back in the 70s when the Equal Rights Amendment was being debated across this land and the hot issue that was, oh my gosh, should we give women the same rights as men? And there were folks, women that said, no, 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 they need to be back in the home. And there were folks that said, no, 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 women need to have equal pay as men. And are we going to have unity? Yeah, what are we going to do about private facilities? And, oh, it was just, you know, an awful debate because it really deflected from the real issue that all of us are God's creatures and all of us are created equal. And so I remember Alice Paul as being at the forefront of this and remembering the debate both in high school and college. But man, I didn't know until a few years ago that Alice Paul was pro-life. Now here's a woman that was painted as this equal rights, left-wing feminist, and yet when we look at pro-life issues, we think they're a conservative, right-wing issue. But it was Alice Paul, the original author of the Equal Rights Amendment, who stated, abortion is the ultimate exploitation of women. Let me repeat that. Abortion is the ultimate exploitation of women from this far-left, hard-nosed person. Add to her views the ones previously referenced, and it is difficult to see any ambiguity or confusion about where these feminists and advocates of the women's rights movement stood on the issue of abortion. Simply put, they detested abortion and went as far as publicly and privately as they could in condemning it. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, it seems as though their rhetoric has been largely lost over the years, hidden in the annals of history, and I just don't know why. Because if we don't understand the full depth of history, we'll never understand March 15th, 2011, and the views that we debate in this very chamber today. And it's sad because as a little girl, I didn't know about these pioneers. I didn't know about their pro-life positions. I didn't know that they were sisters with me. I thought they were different. I thought that the folks that stood before me to give us equal rights were pro-choice, but could be farther from the truth. I think many people wrongly believe that feminism and pro-life principles are mutually exclusive and cannot be reconciled with each other. But when you look at history, you can see that they're not exclusive, but inclusive. Because it is we, as I said earlier, that have the responsibility to have the children, to continue to procreate for the future. That is why we were put here on earth, to have children. And it is our responsibility to make sure that these children are cared for, both inside the womb and out. And for a court to say it is our right to end it, I think is exclusive of what we were made of. It is against what we are made of. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'll speak more, but I've had the privilege of being joined by my good friend, the Congresswoman from North Carolina, and I would like to yield as much time to the good Congresswoman as she would like.
Thank you so much to my esteemed colleague from Ohio, and your comments are so pertinent to today's fight. And you know, we are women, we're conservative women, and those who have come before us, as you pointed out so eloquently, we don't know what they believed, but we're starting to unveil all of that. And Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of women, to honor the rich contributions women have made in history, in the history of this world. And I want to take a moment to discuss the strong pro-life movement that my colleagues and I are continuing to fight today. I rise in support and fight on behalf of women. And in this month dedicated to women, I ask them to choose life for themselves and for their child. The original feminists were indeed against abortion. These women believed that there was power in motherhood and choosing life. Alice Paul, the author of the original Equal Rights Amendment, said it best: abortion is the exploitation of women. It is this exploitation by groups like Planned Parenthood that frighten me for the women of our country. It has been proven that women who have had an abortion are 6 to 7 times more likely to commit suicide in the following year than a woman who chooses to deliver her child. We all know of the syndrome, postpartum depression. Women who abort were 65% more likely than delivering women to be at risk for long-term clinical depression. 65% of U.S. women who had abortions experienced multiple symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which they attributed to their abortion. In another study, 60% said they felt that part of them died. And I quote, "Part of them died." Compared to women who deliver, women who abort are more than twice as likely to be subsequently hospitalized for psychiatric illness within 6 months and subsequently require significantly more treatments for the psychiatric illness through outpatient care. There are also numerous health risks that can occur after an abortion is performed. Reproductive complications and problems with subsequent deliveries can occur. One of these being pelvic inflammatory disease, which is a major direct cause of infertility. After an abortion, there is a 7 to 15-fold increase in placenta previa in subsequent pregnancies, a life-threatening condition for the mother and baby that increases the risk of birth defect, stillbirth, and excessive bleeding, leading to possible loss of life of the woman. Honestly, I could go on and on about the after effects of an abortion, but I think that the picture has been made quite clear. The picture has been believed it was not sufficient merely to denounce abortion. Anthony considered it the work of women to prevent this violation. This is the task that Susan B. Anthony gives us to continue today. Like Anthony, we too must challenge the status quo for the sake of women and their children. Women deserve better than abortion. Thank you, and I will yield back my time.
Thank you to the gentlelady from North Carolina for so eloquently pointing out some of the dangers of abortion, both physical and emotional. And I don't think the chapter, Mr. Speaker, has been written on the dangers of abortion. But I do wonder the lives that we've missed and the fabric and how it has been compromised, the fabric of America, the fabric of the world, because an innocent life didn't get to be woven into it. You know, when we're born, our parents don't know what we're going to become. They just hope that we're happy, and they hope that we're healthy. I mean, you look at our president. Do you think when he was born, his mom thought he was going to be the president of the United States? I seriously doubt it. He didn't come from a dynasty of presidents. He's just an ordinary person born from an ordinary mom. But he, you know, had the opportunity and the privilege to live in America and become the president. Our very own speaker from Cincinnati, Ohio, I dare say his parents never thought he'd be Speaker of the House. They were ordinary people. They owned a bar. They had 12 kids. Now, chances are 12 kids would do 12 different things, but I don't think any of them thought they were going to be Speaker of the House. But that mother gave all those kids love. And because they lived in America, the piece of fabric that he has become resides over this wonderful body. And I point that out because none of us know what our children or grandchildren will become. But it's incumbent upon us to give them that chance to be the best person they can be, the best version of themselves. And that starts at conception. It doesn't start when we choose for it to start. It starts when God chooses for it to start. Or if you don't want to use the term God, nature chooses for it to start. And when you compromise that, you compromise life all the way through. You know, as I said before, many people see feminism and pro-life issues as exclusive. Well, they're inclusive. And I would like to offer evidence of the pro-life feminists in the past, the ones that we owe so much, because they are in a large part responsible for women being able to go to college, to serve in the military, to vote, and may I dare say, stand on the floor this very evening. It is because of them that we are here today arguing for this precious position. In a few minutes, I'm going to be joined by another good lady from North Carolina. And I believe that this young lady is going to eloquently talk about her views on women in history and the pro-life movement. And I now yield to the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Well, I thank the gentlewoman from Ohio, my colleague, for organizing this time to speak about the importance of protecting unborn children in this country. March is National Women's History Month, and each year other members and I of the pro-life Women's Caucus, make a point of coming to the House floor to celebrate the achievements of women and talk about the detrimental impact of abortions on women. Last year, it was brought to my attention that the University of North Carolina system, which is, I've attended 3 of the universities in the system, required its students to purchase health care through the university if they did not have acceptable coverage through their parents or on their own. These plans automatically enroll students in abortion coverage regardless of gender or their feelings regarding abortion. Pro-life groups in North Carolina, as well as the Students for Life of America, wrote to the UNC system, as well as North Carolina Governor Bev Perdue, requesting that they not force students to purchase abortion coverage as part of their student health plan. The UNC system responded by allowing students to opt out of abortion coverage. However, a student still pays the same amount for health care coverage, regardless of whether or not abortions are included on his or her plan. This situation was brought to my attention because the UNC system, along with at least 37 other university systems across the country, require their students to purchase health care coverage that includes abortion. These universities are including the cost of this health care plan in the total cost of attendance, which means there may be federal money covering these health insurance plans and thereby covering abortion. My concerns about unborn children, not only in North Carolina but across the United States, prompted me to send a letter to the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, requesting that he look into the UNC situation and determine if, in fact, taxpayer money was being used to purchase these health insurance plans. Secretary Duncan responded last month and said the Department of Education was not able to determine if students were able to use federal, also known as taxpayer student aid money, to purchase these health insurance plans, which can include abortion coverage. This is unacceptable. There should be no question whatsoever that taxpayer money should not be used to purchase abortion coverage, regardless of whether it is through a student health plan at a university or at an abortion clinic. I will continue to work with the Department and the UNC system to ensure that taxpayer money is not being used to pay for abortions. As a Christian, I am adamantly opposed to the practice of abortion, and I'm especially opposed to the American taxpayer being forced to pay for it. This is why last month I voted with 239 of my colleagues to stop subsidizing Planned Parenthood's radical abortion agenda with taxpayer money. In 2009 alone, Planned Parenthood reported that the organization performed over 332,000 abortions nationwide, and in the next 2 years will require each and every one of its 87 affiliates to have at least one abortion clinic. The vast majority of my constituents do not want their hard-earned money paying for abortions, and as their elected representative, I will continue fighting to protect unborn children and taxpayers from the scourge of abortion. And Congresswoman Schmidt, I have here a chart that I'd like to make sure people watching can see. This is from a Quinnipiac poll in December 2009. It's a little hard to read Quinnipiac down here, but it was a poll that asked women, do you support or oppose allowing abortions to be paid for by public funds under a health care reform bill? Only 25% of the women polled said they support it, 70% oppose, and 5% didn't know or didn't care. That is an astounding number to have.
Especially, may I add, for women. I mean, because we're always cast as the ones that really want abortion, and it's the men that don't want it. But you're telling me that 70% of the women in that December 2009 study adamantly opposed federal funding of abortion under the health care bill.
That's correct. And I'm sorry I couldn't be on the floor for your entire presentation. I was in the Rules Committee and could not leave to come down. But as I came in, I heard you talking about the fact that pro-life women can be feminist. And I think that's very important for us to point out. But I do like the quote from Alice Paul, who worked very hard for equality for women, who said abortion is the ultimate exploitation of women. And I think that as we work hard to see that women are treated equally in our society under the law, that we make sure that they are not exploited by abortion. And there's another quote from Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I don't know if you have used it, but she said, "When we consider that women are treated as property, it is degrading to women that we should treat our children as property to be disposed of as we see fit." That was in a letter to Julia Ward Howe in October 1873 and recorded in Howe's diary. I think, again, that it's so important that women be here during Women's History Month to speak in favor again of rights for women, but that we point out that we are opposed to abortion, which is the ultimate exploitation of women. And I yield back.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm really glad that you took the time to point out that survey, because I believe that the nation has shifted its opinion on abortions since 1973. And maybe it's because with technology and with the fact that sonograms can now show us the color of a baby's eyes and what it's going to look like inside the mom's womb at as early as, like 3 months, that we're really believing and knowing that it really is a baby. It's not this little fetus, this little mushy thing. It's really a baby. And when you see that sonogram and you see that baby inside the womb, you got to say to yourself, how can I call this anything else but life? And I think that's probably one of the reasons why throughout the years public opinion has truly shifted on abortion. A decade ago, back in 2001, there was a poll taken wherein 40% of the respondents identified themselves as being pro-life, while 49% identified themselves as being pro-choice. Well, in 2005, another poll was taken. There was little movement toward the pro-life position. 42% said they're pro-life, while 52% said they're pro-choice. But for some reason, in 2006, the number grew, 45 to 47. And in 2008, the numbers were 46 to 48. Now, maybe that's because of the prevalence of all of these sonograms. And today, when your daughter or your son goes in with his wife for the sonogram, the grandparents and great-grandparents go too. It didn't happen a decade ago. But, oh, my gosh, it's a family thing because we can't wait to see what the baby is. And we're told to cover our eyes at that one moment if you don't want to know what the sex of the baby is. Believe me, I couldn't tell anyway, but I've gone twice and had to close my eyes twice. And I think because the families involved in this whole sonogram with the birth of the baby, that all of our eyes are beginning to light up and say, wow, that really is a life. In just 3 months' time, it's a real baby. In May 2009, 51% of those polled identified themselves as being pro-life, where only 42% responded that they were pro-choice. Now, the latest poll I could find on the subject was conducted in January of this year, just a couple of months ago, and it was consistent with the 2009 poll. Half the respondents pardon me, said they were pro-life. The numbers become even more definitive when it comes to public funding or taxpayer monies going towards the funding of abortions, even indirectly. This is a very real and timely debate as we struggle today to tackle our enormous deficit and debt, which, Mr. Speaker, if we don't get under control, will reshape this country in a way that I don't believe will allow our children to have at least an equal opportunity as us, if not to have a better opportunity as us. But that's a debate for another day on the debt and deficit. You know, when I first got here in September of 2005, the very first person I wanted to meet was Henry Hyde of Illinois, because he was my hero. See, after Roe v. Wade, people at my kitchen table and in my family were talking about money, federal money being used for abortion. And I mean, my mom and dad were mad, and shoot, even I was mad. And Henry Hyde was mad too, and in 1976, he offered the Hyde Amendment. And it simply said that federal taxpayer dollars were barred from funding abortion, period, case closed. And that amendment has been consistent with the policy of this House ever since. So I wanted to meet that hero, that gentleman. And when you walk into my office, you see a picture of he and I on the last day that he served in this House. Of all the people that I've ever met, he is truly my hero. Anyway, every year we debate this, and even in the health care bill, it was a hotly contested issue. And after the bill was voted on, the President had an executive order that at this point still stops the federal funding of abortion in health care, we believe. But that's a very fragile piece of paper, and I really believe this body needs to recodify in the health care bill that no money will ever be spent for abortion, and no insurance policies will have any federal dollars attached to it that would allow for abortions to occur. But that's something I believe we have to work on this year, Mr. Speaker. And you know, even today, in this body, as we voted on the CR, the issue of abortion was there. Do we put it in the CR and stop the federal funding of abortion or not? You know, we have a lot of pro-life leaders in the House, and they've looked at the budget very, very shrewdly, and they've determined that if we don't put these protections in place, federal funding will slip into the budget in the future. And that's why they are so adamant about putting out bills and provisions in CRs that would stop federal funding of abortion. And one of the latest initiatives to receive a full vote in the House was an amendment introduced by my good friend from Indiana, Mr. Pence, that would prohibit federal funding for Planned Parenthood, which happens to be the largest abortion provider in the country. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, they have a separate wall, and they're really only using the money for women's health issues. They're not using it for abortion, but we know money is fungible. And we know in a building you can't really dissect how much energy costs are going to one side of the building and how much are going to the other. So we know that while, the actual procedure isn't using federal money, we know that the building is. And so it's fungible, and it's slipping through. But a few weeks ago when we had the CR, his amendment received, I think, 239 votes out of this body that said no, Planned Parenthood shouldn't receive the money. And you know, Mr. Speaker, maybe it's a bigger debate than just the abortion issue, because, you know, what we saw last fall was a sting operation that showed in some cases abortion clinics, Planned Parenthood clinics across the country were actually talking about or ignoring the fact that people were coming in about human trafficking and saying they wanted a human trafficking issue, and if the underage girl got pregnant, how could they get an abortion? And the gal at the desk didn't seem to think there was a problem with that conversation. Now, I'm not saying that Planned Parenthood International condones it, and I'm sure that they don't. But I'm saying that there were clinics that this conversation occurred. I know in my own hometown in Cincinnati, Ohio, where in 2 cases there were young girls that went to the Planned Parenthood clinic on Auburn Avenue, and both told the abortion provider they were underage and they were pregnant, one by her father, one by a coach. The father's now in jail. And the situation with the parents were they didn't know the coach took her to the abortion clinic. He signed the document that said, oh, I'm the legal guardian, and it wasn't until later when she went to the doctor on another issue that the doctor said, well, when did your daughter have an abortion, that this whole thing exploded. And right now it's in court. They're going after the coach, and they're trying to go after Planned Parenthood because the girl said, I'm 15. So maybe Planned Parenthood shouldn't have our money if they're not careful stewards about people that are coming through their doors. Because a 15-year-old that's pregnant, well, I think that's called statutory rape, no matter who the father was. And if a girl comes in at 15, we should be asking questions. How did you get pregnant? Who was the father? What happened? Because that's breaking the law. So above the fact that we have a looming deficit and a looming debt, above the fact that I believe that money is fungible with Planned Parenthood, above the fact that in some cases they have people that go into clinics and they have a lady or a guy at the desk that doesn't understand what human trafficking is all about, maybe they shouldn't have the money because when it's right in their eye, they simply choose to ignore the issue. Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of pro-life people in America, and there are a lot of pro-life people in this House, and I think it is time that we discuss this issue more openly, because people of this nation understand that all life is precious, including the life of the unborn. They also understand that our money comes from taxpayers, and taxpayers expect us to do the right things with their money. And that means protecting life at all costs. You know, one of the things that I want to say before I wrap up, and we talk about polling, is that there have been multiple polls conducted on the subject within the last year of federal funds and abortion. 2 that I want to highlight were conducted by CNN in Quinnipiac. Now, CNN is hardly a right-wing organization, but the own CNN poll showed that 60% of Americans oppose public monies going to fund abortion. That's well over a majority. The Quinnipiac poll shows 72% oppose it. Wow, that's a lot of Americans. And I believe that we need to do the right thing and end the public funding of abortion, whether it's in the health care bill, any bill that comes here, or any monies that go overseas. Like the feminists, the pro-life women of the past, pro-life women today simply believe that we are all afforded the right to life. It is not a gift from our government. It is a gift from our Lord. He is the one that has allowed us to stand here in America and across the world. He is the one that has said to us, he wants us to be in his image and his likeness. It is our Lord that wants us to be the best person we can be. And if we are to be the best person we can be, we have to ensure that each other has that same chance. Whether it's a little seed in a womb that is 20 minutes old, or it's an elderly person in a nursing home. All of us are equal in the Lord's eyes. All of us have the right to life. And so I'm proud to stand here today, like my sisters before me, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, like Susan B. Anthony, and yes, Alice Paul, and say, enough's enough. Women's rights are women's rights. And if a woman has rights, those rights are the child's rights, because everybody has the right to life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2000.